Hello, everybody, and welcome to Season 2, Episode 3 of the Common Caveat. Today, we are diving deeper into Andrew Gallimore's alien information theory, which proposes that consciousness is part of a hyperdimensional code, with dimethyltryptamine, also known as DMT, acting as a technology to interface us with intelligences beyond our own. While searching through the juicy parts of his book, Chapter 8 is about how the psychedelic molecule impacts the brain, and my goal is to identify his key sources that might have supportive empirical data, revealing how he could arrive at his unorthodox position. This puts me on the edge of my seat, considering his professional experience in the laboratory, in university settings, and publishing peer-reviewed research. If that doesn't put you on the edge of your seat, well, it should. My name is Matthew Sabatine, and I am here to help you navigate the crossroads of the Christian faith, science, and the human experience. So buckle up, because this is gonna be a bumpy ride. If I didn't already clarify Gallimore's unorthodox position in Episode 1 of Season 2 here, let me do that now. He states on page 4, communication between humans and distant alien species doesn't depend upon interstellar travel, but only on the transmission of code, end quote. Then on page 7, DMT is a molecule found in countless plant and animal species across Earth, including humans. It is also a technology for facilitating the almost instantaneous transport to an orthogonal, hyperdimensional omniverse and communication with the living, conscious, and intelligent beings therein. Lastly, on page 8, Gallimore doesn't want to give a name to this alien hyperintelligence programming our reality code from its residence beyond our three-dimensional realm, but he is sure that DMT is the gatekeeper standing between us and that place. And according to Gallimore, we will remain confined within our simplified digital framework until we can properly harness DMT as a means of transferring ourselves to the higher dimensions. Moving forward, there are some key terms I want you to focus on here and now. Number 1 is serotonin, a mood regulator that you probably recognize from discussions on depression and anxiety. It is also significant to how psychedelics such as LSD and DMT impact the brain. Raphe nuclei exist at the brainstem and dispatch the serotonin throughout the brain, traveling along axon pathways that act like long tentacles spread throughout the cortex. 5-HT receptors are the particular spots on nerve cells where serotonin binds during psychedelic activity. 5-HT2A receptors are mainly targeted by psychedelics that excite other triangular pyramid-shaped cells that send signals between brain regions, while 5-HT1A, on the other hand, relaxes those pyramidal cells. The axons connect to the cortex, that is the outer layer of your brain, responsible for higher functions of thought, perception, and decision-making. Your cortex links up with your thalamus, an egg-shaped piece that is the brain's central hub, distributing signals to their proper addresses, and is also significant for sleep, alertness, and attention. Communication circuits called thalamocortical loops are the circuits connecting the thalamus and the cortex. But in order to continue having the building blocks of perception, groups of nerve cells must be organized into thalamocortical columns, which we can abbreviate as T columns. And in order to integrate information across various brain regions, we must have gamma oscillations, which are rhythmic electrical patterns moving at 30 to 100 cycles per second to synchronize all of the brain regions into a unified experience. Beneath all of this are the excitatory postsynaptic potentials, abbreviated as EPSPs, which are tiny electrical signals that increase the neuron's ability to fire when enough are present. They contribute to the membrane potential, which is the electrical charge difference across a nerve cell's surface that fluctuates up and down. They often strive for the threshold potential, which is the lowest amount of electricity necessary for a nerve cell to fire a signal. The thalamus and cortex work together on a T-state repertoire, which is the set of all possible brain states in representing your perceptions of what is outside of yourself. This adds up to what you register as your phenomenal world, which is your direct, private, subjective moments and seconds of living as experienced in real time. Now, why is your phenomenal world important? Well, it seems that Gallimore believes your external world and internal world have a reciprocal relationship, with one affecting the other. There is no clear division between the two, not entirely at least, even though society's common sense has convinced us that you don't see the entire room changing as you witness your friend tripping on DMT on your couch. A marriage between your external and internal worlds, the extent to which Gallimore means this literally or metaphorically, I'm not sure. But perhaps he answers my question on page 109, saying, quote, "As a brain evolves, it becomes better at generating a useful and informative model of the environment. This can be quantified as an increase in the mutual information between the brain and the external world. Psychedelics appear to temporarily reverse this process. The intrinsic activity or information becomes looser and spreads more freely under the influence of a psychedelic drug. The information generated by the thalamocortical system becomes less constrained by sensory information, and the mutual information between the brain and the external world decreases. This doesn't mean that the psychedelic state or the phenomenal world experienced is any less valid or real than the normal waking world. Simply that the world has changed its structure. The thalamocortical system explores novel key states that fall outside its normal repertoire." It seems that Gallimore believes that changes to the outside world are actually there when the psychedelic molecule gets involved and alters the information in the thalamocortical columns of organizational blocks of perception upon which your world is constructed. Perhaps the difference between you and your normal waking state and your friend tripping on DMT is that you have simply not entered into the unfamiliar territory with him. Perhaps the chemical and ontological difference between your external and internal world in a psychedelic context is the literal switch to a series of thalamocortical patterns that you've never experienced before, leaving you with an unfamiliarity that literally shocks the crap out of you. The blurring boundaries of everything in sight, the increasingly vibrant colors, and maybe the inanimate objects turning into living creatures? Name whatever crazy thing you can think of. In spite of whatever can or can't be said about the division between what is external and internal, Gallimore is unwilling to nonchalantly dismiss it all away as mere hallucinations. And I agree with him at least that far. What you see in your ordinary undrugged state of consciousness should not be taken for granted. Nothing in objective reality, as it seems, especially in light of how psychedelics literally change the processing of external stimuli. What Gallimore calls, quote, completely novel key states are selected by sensory information that must transition from the old repertoire to a new one. The information of your phenomenal world is contained within an integrated T state, which in this context of psychedelics gains new organizational perceptual columns that are enhanced by the gamma oscillations that can now distribute more freely across the cortex, maybe even when there is no incoming sensory information. Much of this jaw-dropping psychedelic madness begins with the psychedelic molecule being more active at the 5-HT2A receptor, which excites the pyramidal cells that send signals to other nerve cells, while the psychedelic molecule is less active at the 5-HT1A receptor that relaxes the activity. This means more depolarization, which means reduced difference in charge across the membrane, which then leads to more gamma oscillations in the thalamocortical loops and the increased sensitivity of the cortical outer layer of the brain. Gallimore's idea of psychedelic potency in relationship with gamma oscillations and 5-HT receptors is based on a 2010 article from the Journal of Neuroscience, in which the experimenters used in vivo electrophysiology tools on rats that were anesthetized with chloral hydrate to prevent pain and movement during the experiment. It was found that serotonin affects the cycles of electrical signals and synchronous patterns in the prefrontal cortex, abbreviated as the PFC, thus implying serotonin's role in disorders such as schizophrenia and depression. Gallimore's concept on page 107 that T columns are recruited into novel activation patterns that aren't part of the normal repertoire of T states, end quote, is supported by a 2014 study investigating psilocybin's effects on brain activity using functional MRI to measure blood oxygen levels. The study focused on 3 key brain regions. Number 1 is the hippocampus, in charge of memory. Number 2 is the anterior cingulate cortex, abbreviated as ACC, in charge of emotion regulation and decision-making. And number 3 is the default mode network, or the DMN, in charge of self-reflection and introspection. Psilocybin was administered intravenously to 15 healthy participants, and brain activity was analyzed for changes in spatial and temporal dynamics. The study found increased temporal variability, meaning brain activity became more dynamic and unpredictable, expanding the brain's repertoire of states, mirroring Gallimore's concept of new activation patterns. Spectral analysis revealed decreased low-frequency power in higher-level cortical regions, while point process analysis showed significant changes in activity across the DMN and networks linked to executive control and attention, which are areas strongly influenced by serotonin 2A receptors primarily targeted by psilocybin. Analysis of dynamic functional connectivity patterns demonstrated increased entropy, reflecting a more diverse and flexible range of connectivity states. As a side note, the profound effects on the DMN in a psychedelic context is unsurprising, considering how the DMN is often linked to ego dissolution, defined as the temporary loss of the sense of self, often experienced during mystical or spiritual states, where the boundaries between oneself and the world blur, resulting in feelings of profound peace, diminished fear of death, and a sense of oneness with the universe. These findings suggest psilocybin enhances brain flexibility, allowing exploration of novel states and dynamics, supporting Gallimore's notion of an expanded T-state repertoire. The DMN is a task-negative network associated with mind-wandering, self-focused thoughts, daydreaming, and introspection. Meanwhile, a separate network called the task-positive network, or TPN, is associated with outward-directed activities such as attention-demanding tasks, problem-solving, and interactions with the external environment. The two are anti-correlated, which means when one is active, the other is inactive. This arrangement of brain activity directs the stream of information to particular cortical areas. But a psychedelic lifts barriers between these two networks, enabling freer, more global communication and integration between the two. The expanded connectivity allows the brain to explore the novel T states that Gallimore describes. The anti-correlation and differentiation between the DMN and TPN characterizes the normal waking state that we all must keep when we drive vehicles, operate heavy machinery, attend business meetings, cook food on a stove, etc. The blurred boundaries and free information flow between the DMN and TPN characterizes the psychedelic state. Gallimore admits that the brain may produce more information in a psychedelic state than in a typical waking state. My response to that is this: if a psychedelic state resembles what people often hear or see upon death, more information and vivid visions does not correspond well with the conventional idea that consciousness is sputtering out into non-existence when we die. Authorities of the law tell us not to use drugs while driving, right? And for good reason. From an evolutionary perspective, the novelty states and information generated from a psychedelic are not useful for immediate physical survival. So the normal waking brain filters it out. Your normal waking state is concerned with the here and now and not the hereafter. Hence, particular people prefer to assume that there is no hereafter. You don't want to increase your sensitivity to sensory information, nor have vivid visions when you are trying to hunt the small fish while not getting devoured by the big fish. On a regular basis, you need to know the difference between the two. So, how does any of this relate to Christianity? Well, first of all, it is interesting that Gallimore is willing to even mention an alien hyperintelligence being the author and programmer of our reality's code. I wonder if he has ever read Colossians 1, verses 16 through 17, which says, "For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things have been created through him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together." End quote. Being in our lower dimension and wanting to reach a higher dimension could speak to the limitations of human understanding and the greatness of God's intelligence, which could parallel with Isaiah chapter 55, 8 through 9, saying, "For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts." End quote. Encountering new or unusual phenomena, especially during altered states of consciousness, should prompt us to be on guard against deception in light of 1 John chapter 4, 1, that says, "Dear friends, do not believe every spirit, but test the spirits to see whether they are from God, because many false prophets have gone out into the world." End quote. And then lastly, John 14:6, Jesus answered, "I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." This is a reminder that Christ is the ultimate truth, which can be contrasted with the search for ultimate truth through psychedelics or other means, because if psychedelic users are meeting entities that are real, indisputably real, they can still lie to you. Thank you for watching this episode, ladies and gentlemen. Hit the subscribe button, knock that bell off its you-know-what, and thank you. Have a great day.